Hey guys, welcome to another video. My name's Jake from Cryonaut Media and Cryogen, and today we're looking at Ableton Live 10 Beta. So if you've been following along with the news for these things, you've probably seen that there's a bunch of new devices that they've added in this version, and I'm going to go over one of the new ones coming right up. So in the past couple of videos, you've seen me go over the new pedal, drum bus, and echo plugins, and just kind of see how they manipulate your sound and what kind of cool things you can do with them that you maybe couldn't have done before, at least not with the stock Ableton devices. Well, today we're going to go over the Wavetable synth, which is really awesome, and I'm really excited to use this, mostly because I've used Serum a lot in the past, and this is going to be very similar. So when you first load it up, this is the main view you get. You have oscillator 1 over here, with the sub to the side there. You have the filter, and then you have the first of the mod sources, which is the amp right here. And then you have different tabs. You can go to, envelope 2 and 3, LFO 1 and 2, the mod matrix over here, MIDI matrix, and then over here, oscillator 1 and 2. That's kind of cluttered to me and difficult to use. So thankfully, as with some of their devices, Ableton has this little breakout button here. So you click that, and it goes at the top screen. Now you have, again, oscillator 1 and 2 down here with the filter, and then the matrix here, but now your envelopes and LFOs are up top. But what's really cool about this is you can grab this and expand it up to the full screen, and now you have a full synth. So oscillator 1 and 2 with the sub to the side, the 3 different envelopes here, the 2 oscillators, and then down here is the filter and all the modulation settings you could ask for. And then the little master settings here. So if you've used Serum in the past, you'll kind of be familiar with this look. It looks very similar right now. And so basically we're just going to go through all the different settings and what we have here and just kind of see what it looks like. So by default, you have this sound here. And if you've been using Ableton Live for very long at all, you'll recognize the amp here has a sort of pluck kind of a sound, but just a little bit, so it's more of like a bell. And I think this particular synth has my favorite starting sound out of all of them. I mean, using a sine wave and then having that little bell kind of sound is just really cool and pretty unique. Most of the time you start with a saw wave, and this is just a bit different. So going over the UI here, you have this subsection where you can turn off and on. Once it's turned on, it just adds another layer. And you're not really going to hear it right now because this is a sine wave and this is a sine wave, which is what this tone means. So tone goes from sine to like saw, basically. And you can adjust it to be the same octave, -1 or -2. And then you have a little bit of a level control for just the sub. Now for oscillator 1, there's a lot of stuff going on here. So first of all, you can turn it off and on here. Same with oscillator 2. And then you choose your wavetable kind of group. So if you want the basic ones, you want more complex, you want filters. This is a bunch of filter sweeps on it, which is really cool. Maybe let's do acid pulse. And then this is your wavetable here. So over here is the kind of transport control between the different sections of the wavetable. And over here is the volume of this oscillator. So let's go back to, what is amber? So we'll start with the collection here on amber. There's a whole bunch of different options in here, and each of these collections has a bunch of different options as well. So I'm not going to go over all of those, but just know there's a lot of them. You can use these little arrows over here to cycle through one by one. So again, volume, the position of the waveform. Down here is the tuning in semitones, and then just some detune. And over here is a little bit of an interesting kind of effects area. So by default, you're at none, but you can also choose FM, classic, or modern. And FM will let you choose the tune and the amount. So when you bring the amount up, you'll see and hear the sound change based on the frequency modulation. And then the tuning will adjust how high or low that frequency is. So how fast that sound is modulating, basically. So this FM is a little bit interesting. You can't, as far as I know, use another oscillator like this one over here to modulate this one. It's going to be modulating itself. If the amount is at 0, it's not going to do anything. So it has to be above that to be heard. And then you can use anywhere in there in that range to modulate the waveform. Now the tuning at 0 is going to be the same note, basically the same octave as your source. When you bring it up to 50%, that's going to be 1 octave higher, and then 100% is 2 octaves higher, and the same thing with the reverse. So negative 50 is 1 octave lower, negative 100 is 2 octaves lower. So this gives you a little bit different of a control than something like Serum. Then you also have Classic, and this is basically going to be controlling the pulse width and sync. So this is basically the waveform here, and so when you adjust the pulse width, it's going to be adjusting how long it takes to go through here, and then just making this last bit elongated. So it really impacts the sound. So if we reset this, so when you bring it up or down a lot, it's playing this part really quickly, and then it plays this section here, which takes a lot longer to get back to this part, which this is all happening super fast. So you're not going to hear like this stretch that takes longer. It just really changes the sound pretty drastically. Can be really good to modulate that with an LFO or maybe even an envelope to get some really cool sounds and good movement. And then you have the sync section, which kind of affects the pitch in an interesting way. So you can kind of detune it almost from itself. Basically, it's just manipulating the waveform in another way. It's a little bit different. And then finally, we have Modern. And this is just another kind of distortion of your waveform. Like, if you ever used sort of like wave shaping, that's kind of what this is going to be doing. So that's the warp, and then fold. Again, both really good candidates for LFOs especially, or envelopes. Just different ways to modulate that sound and have it move constantly. It could be really cool. And then of course you have this transpose over here, which will raise or lower the entire overall sound by however many semitones you choose. So if you wanted to maybe make a couple layers of this synth, you could have one that's tuned up an octave or one that's tuned up a fifth, and then they'll be playing the same notes relative to whatever MIDI keys you've pressed or have programmed in. So moving on to oscillator 2, all of this is the same except for one thing, which over here in this corner is this different view. You can switch it to this circular one, which makes no sense to me, but looks really cool. So, I mean, basically this top one is the same as the outside here, and then as you move down into the inside, that's when it moves down here. But some of these, especially like this one, doesn't make much sense because there's only like 4 different waveforms here. So having it adjust through there, you can't see all these different ridges in here. That makes it a little bit easier to tell what's happening and looks cooler. But other than that, everything is the same here in oscillator 2. So then moving down to the next section, you have your envelopes and LFOs. And as is the typical fashion, especially for Ableton Live devices, you have an envelope that is specifically the amp, which basically controls the volume of your whole sound. Now this can also modulate other parameters, but it's always going to control the volume by default. You can't change that. Envelopes 2 and 3 don't have to modulate anything, but they could if you wanted to, and they can modulate any number of things. There is a limit, but I don't know what that is. So with each one, just like with all the other Ableton devices, you can click and drag these little boxes or the little spheres over here, or you can adjust the actual numbers themselves. If you wanted to get really specific amounts, you can do that, or if you want to go by feel, you can go up here. And then you have the different modes for each envelope. None means it plays through it once, and then that's it. It stops at the last point that you're on. So when you hit the key, it goes up to here and down to the sustain, and it stays there until you let go, and then it goes to the release. If you set it to trigger, it's going to play through the entire thing once, no matter how long you hold the note for. So as we push it, you can hear it goes up to the sustain and then immediately goes back down to the release based on these times. This is not going to hold out long notes, but it'll just play through the whole thing once and only once. Loop does the same thing as trigger, it plays through the whole shape here, but then it repeats and goes through it again and again and again based on these time. So the release is pretty long here, so if we shorten that, you can get some really interesting things with that. And especially if you're modulating like the filter cutoff or maybe this movement up here, you can get some really interesting sounds as you manipulate these, especially with the loop function. So again, envelope 2 and 3 are the exact same as the first one, only they don't control the volume. So moving on to the LFOs over here, you have LFO 1 and 2, and the couple different settings you have here is the attack, so how long it takes for this LFO to come into play. So the easiest thing to do would be to have the frequency mapped to LFO 1. So now it's against it to 20 seconds, so it's going to take a while to really get to full effect, but you can hear it coming into effect right now. And as I hold it, it's getting more and more into that waveform. So this 20 seconds is a bit long, but if we were to say 1 or 2 seconds, you could have it ease into something like that. And again, I'm putting it on the filter frequency cutoff just so you can hear what's going on, but you can do anything with that. Next, we come over to if you want to have it adjusted by hertz or ratio, which is down here in the rate. And then retrigger. So in Serum, you have a few more options, but basically retrigger on means every time you hit a key, it starts at the beginning of the LFO. If you turn this off, this just plays through constantly, and no matter when you press a key or let go, it'll all be at the same point. Just, you know, it's going to pick it up, the LFO, wherever it is in its cycle. So again, there's uses for either one, but most common use is probably having retrigger turned on. So down here, you can choose the shape of your waveform. Let's get rid of this. So you have just the main options. Unfortunately, you can't draw in your own LFOs right now or do anything custom with that. You're limited to just these. But in reality, this is going to be good enough for most everything you could possibly want. So down here, again, you can choose the rate, you know, how fast or slow it cycles through. The amount, now this is where it can get confusing because you have an amount over here, and then once you go to the mod matrix, you have another amount. But this is how much of the signal that's coming into here will be affected by the LFO. So 100% means the entire signal will be affected by this. If you're bringing it down to 50, then only half of the signal is going to be affected by the LFO. The other half will be dry. So it's kind of like a mix parameter. Shape just adjusts the waveform actual shape, if it's going to fold in on itself or anything like that. Just gives you a different kind of options for each waveform. So again, between the different waveforms up here and then this shape, you have so many different options. You can't really say that you can't get the right LFO because there is so many, almost infinite options right here. And then offset just moves it to the left or right, you know, for phase issues, or if you wanted to just adjust it a little bit. So then over here, you have LFO 2, all the same things as LFO 1. There's nothing different about it at all. It's just a second copy of it. So that's going to wrap it up for video 1 on the Wavetable synth. I didn't want to make this one too long for you guys. So in the next video, we're going to talk about the filter and the ridiculously powerful mod matrix down here. Thanks for watching, and again, go ahead and like the video and subscribe to see more Ableton Live 10 content, and leave a comment below if you really are excited to use Wavetable synth, or if you don't think it's that good and you're going to use a different one anyway. So thanks again, and I'll see you guys next time.